All right, cool. Welcome back, everybody. Issue 16. We should start counting episodes or something because this is the third cut from issue 16. The topic du jour is an OKR tear down. The headline is the decision-making framework for strategic investments. And I like this one a lot because it is overarching, sweeps across the whole business. I thought it ended up being pretty rigorous, and I'm jazzed to jam on it. So here, let's get a little screen share vibing so we can look.
For everyone watching, this is how Kjael spends his time every day. Like, this is his mental math on paper.
That's it. Just like, yeah, we want to be doing desktop too, no doubt. Here we are. Can you see that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beauty. All right. Let me get my little Zoom thing vibing here. Pin you on the screen. There you are, you handsome devil. All right. Decision-making frameworks. Cool. So, and just to bring you up to speed on the broader issue, we did deal teardown with a workflow management SaaS that still has my interest. It's like back here somewhere, but I was thinking about it. I'm like, ooh. So I was going to get some hoodies made, maybe for my family, like that t-shirt. Well, I don't want to spoil anything. I was going to get something cool made as a gift for my crew, and I was like, damn, print on demand. This is what I need. I was like, ooh, there's that business that's, SaaSifying that whole category. So we wrapped on the deal teardown. I thought that was maybe our best to date. Then we jumped into an operating concept. Oh, we skipped the operating concept. My tough week last week. My lady had her appendix out, so we get a hall pass on that one. But that would probably be a good episode, honestly, for you to just rip from the cuff, Kev, because it's so up your alley. But
I was going to ask, when are we coming back to that?
Yeah, we should come back to that because I think that is totally deserving. That's like an hour session, honestly. That's some meat on that bone. So we'll hopefully circle up on that one. And today we're going to jump into, as noted, decision-making framework for strategic investments. And then next week, once we wrap our sprint, the timing is going to be interesting because we wrap the sprint as a team next week. So hypothetically, if we fit it in, we'll ship an issue next week to tell you how sprint number 4 went.
Here's an idea.
Cool.
We do part 2 next week and then the wrap for the following week.
Ooh, giddy up. I like that. All right. Yeah, problem solvers, consummate problem solver, Kjael. God bless you. All right. So we usually kick these off with just kind of a bigger look at the OKR. And for this one, it kind of depends on the context, but usually we'll wrap on all the key results and kind of where they're at. But the headline objective here was a budget and prioritization of strategic investments for our transition to the grow phase. And what did that entail? Successfully pivoting retainers to project-based. And then the thing we're going to be leaning into is the decision-making framework. And then obviously once that's in place, that translates real neatly into a defined list of strategic spend items and a working capital forecast. So I had my FP&A hat on, my CFO hat on. I was like squirming and wiggling the whole time. I was like, ooh, but I think I'm happy with the outcome there. So I think what's interesting, because people might be asking, like, shit, how are you making investment decisions before? It's a little late in the game to be standing up a framework. And so for some additional context, like up until this point, it's been very much a fix and improve emphasis. And with that, we usually come into deals with a generally defined playbook that's probably like 70% applicable despite of context. So a lot of that is a system of records, centralized tech stack, you name it, website refresh. And there is some variability there, but it's basically like, all right, we kind of assume we need to paint the house. We got to assume it needs a new spinal cord. And then once we get past that stuff, then we start to think, all right, should we put a new garage in? Do we fix the kitchen? What do we do here? And that's kind of where we're at, because we want more people moving into the house. The house analogy is always never disappoints.
Everyone gets it. We're all trying to get into the house.
So like all frameworks, and this is all inspired by who I really admire in the business world, like the Dalios of the world. It's so funny now because I think the only decision point is like, is this decision worth a framework or a scorecard? Like, hey, should I get sweet green for lunch? Just buy it or whatever, But that's perhaps it's like above a certain spend threshold, you probably want to run it through something so you can objectively compare it to other stuff. And like as a quick example, just to bring this to light, and something that hit me right between the eyes earlier is like the whole purpose of budgets is to introduce scarcity. And then when you are in the face of scarcity, you have to make trade-offs. So the example that I use to bring this to light is we've got our friend Jane. She's got $100 a month to spend on entertainment, and she's looking at a trip to the theme park or going to see a concert. she's only got $100, right? So now she has to make a decision. What would make me happier? Go scream my head off on a roller coaster or go dance my brains out at a concert? I don't know. What do you feel like, screaming or dancing? What do you value more in life? Is it, do you have a boyfriend? Someone that you're smitten with? What's a better date night? Or would you rather hang out with your friends? Have you not seen your friends in a while? And now all of a sudden she has to kind of think through it, right? Because the tendency without that constraint that is the budget is doing both. And then she's like, shit, I'm $100 in the hole and I'm hungry and I have no more cash this month, right? And I think the big thing there is, in business, running out of cash is not an option. So we need to be very structured in how we think about, this is a budget, cool. That establishes the scarcity, the finiteness, if you will. And then it's like, all right, cool. Do we, as a business, do we want to scream or dance? Do we have a boyfriend, right? Like, how do we think about what we do? And so just, there's a ton of models. There's a shitload. This article here, I thought was like the best roundup. And the original context for us was product roadmap. How do we prioritize features? So the first one was the Kano model, which I think Kano, he's like a dude in Mortal Kombat, right? Or where did Kano come from?
No, you might be thinking about Kane from Batman or something.
Oh, all right.
Not...
But I read Kano and I was like, ooh, I kind of like this one. But this is like, and I thought this matrix here brought it to light, right? So you've got must-have or basic features, and it's like table stakes. Got to get here, got to do it, or else we're not solving pain points, we're not addressing jobs to be done. And then you have performance features, which are kind of like what, and there's, I think, and it's hard for me not to unpeel that onion, but that is probably a function of like, what increases competitive advantage? What is our North Star metric? Is it a function of retention? Are we trying to grow users? But somehow that performance needs to foot to some type of objective. In this instance, it's higher level of customer satisfaction. So that's kind of accretive, right? Must have or basic features is like getting you to table stakes. Performance features is lifting you above. And then you've got the delighters or the excitement features, which is like, let's get people jazzed. And then this one also contemplates how baked it is. So it's like not implemented, fully implemented, and ideally whatever you're looking at is going to fit on this scatter plot, if you will, in some place. What are your thoughts on the Kano model? You dig?
I mean,
don't dig?
No, I like it. It's pretty straightforward, very simple to follow. It's kind of like when your parents tell you, put everything you want into buckets of needs and wants. We're going to handle the needs. Your wants are your business, and then everything else goes in the trash bin or an idea bin. No, it's pretty straightforward.
Yep. This reminds me of conversations with my mom. Like, Mom, I don't want a dirt bike. I need a dirt bike. She's like, yeah, okay, honey. Like, you're still confused. We'll give this a couple of years and circle up. No dirt bikes in the immediate term. Like, oh,
yeah, you're under the
I
liar's
need
curve.
it. Yeah, I'm like, I need it. This is critical to my life. Another option, which is very close, and you can kind of see how there's like some themes that emerge. And I probably looked at 10.
I was
is
gonna say a lot of them overlap, and even with this one, it's almost identical to the Kano, except the extra bucket is the idea bucket that we just referenced. It's like all the things that need to happen in the first three, and in the fourth one, it's we'll punt that to the future, and as it comes up, how about this? We see a lot of platforms do it. That question mark, every time you hit upvote on an idea, that's that fourth bucket with the Moscow model.
Totally. And there's the book is going to escape me. It's from the Basecamp crew. That is a badass software dev camp, basically. Like, they've ripped a bunch of products. I've read a lot of their books. It's called like this. Oh man, I feel bad not being able to pull it up off the top, but they have a thing too where it's like, be very careful with backlogs though, because they end up as like a room that hasn't been cleaned forever. And instead of going into the room and starting to fold all your clothes, it's like, just think about what you need. Like, and just, maybe just start fresh. Like, you don't need to spend all this time kind of digging through stuff that probably lose relevance over time, et cetera. So that's just a quick disclaimer. Like, be careful of like this backlog that just is ever expanding, because you go to look at it and it's like, I'm going to dig through 100 things that are on our thing that we've kind of loosely prioritized. And I don't remember when we added this and yada, yada. But to your point, simply put, must have, should have, could have, won't have.
I'm going to hit you with a few names. I'm on the site. They have one around chaos called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. Then there's rework, shape up, remote, and getting real.
Let's go. So rework was a really fun one because that was like
Okay.
all their business methods and principles. And that's just like a scrappy way to think about operating rhythms, just like a methodology for running a business. Shape up. That was one of them,
Shape
right?
up.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
Shape
the
up is their
featured
one.
one.
Yeah. And they are a lot about, and as we transition towards the model that we selected, like they think a lot about bets. So placing like some kind of value on it as a proxy
Mm-hmm.
for conviction or confidence. And they're like huge, do not keep a backlog at all. They're like, you go sprint at a time, you establish the next up and let it ride. Like backlogs just collect dust and they become a distraction, which I think
So they
I'm
would be
subscribing
more
to.
Kano leaning, you would say?
I think neither. Like for them, I
Mm,
think they probably fit into the rice model more than anything.
the rice model.
They
Okay.
have their own framework. It's like impact is, and so that's actually like kind of a good transition. So I think these are interesting if all we did as operators was ship product, right? And it's like,
Right.
well, in our context, we have to answer questions like, should we invest in creative digital assets? We need a designer to whip this stuff up. That costs money. Or should we ship feature XYZ? And it's like, well, I don't know. Is the design thing a must have, should have, or won't have it? And it's like, that doesn't really work. Or should we buy ads or implement a chatbot for support? Again, that framework falls short. So we want to be able to size up these decisions across the irrespective of the function of the domain and kind of in the
Mm-hmm.
context as full on operators. So the framework that we chose is the RICE method. There's some derivatives of this, but I think when you look at it, generally speaking, it's like impact on one side. So it's like, what's this going to do versus how hard is it and how expensive is it? And that whole thing is like, and you try to
So
find the
yeah.
stuff that has a huge impact and is easy as shit to do. It's like bing, and it's like, cool, let's go. But obviously you got to be careful with that because you end up being too nearsighted and just shipping stuff that's impactful. Obviously, you want to knock down those quick wins early, and which we did with our portfolio company. But after a while, that stuff gets a little bit trickier, and you want to kind of blend quick wins with more mid, long-term type wins. But with this framework in mind, we can look at a bunch of stuff. We can compare paid acquisition investments with a hypothesis test for testing growth channels. For instance, it applies obviously to product roadmaps, hiring. Should we bring on XYZ to lead ABC? I don't know. What's that going to cost in labor? What's the expected impact, et cetera? So generally speaking, and then let's lean in a little bit. So reach, what do we mean by that? What do you think reach means, Kjael? I know that you already know. So you've already gotten the answers to the test.
Exactly. Same way you do surveys to get feedback around what do people love or hate about a product, and then you address the piece that they hate. The reach is essentially that subset of users that you know are going to be immediately impacted by this release.
Totally. And it's for reach and impact, there's a lot of overlap there. And I think what's tricky or how I've kind of defined it here is how many users will this activity or initiative touch in a given time period. I thought the time constraint was interesting because that's just an interesting factor. So it's like it's kind of two vector based, right? Instead of like it's going to impact our whole users, it's like you'd probably prioritize something that'll touch all your users in the next quarter versus something that'll touch all your users 2 quarters from now. But it's typically reflected as a percentage of all users, and then you factor some kind of timeline. Impact is interesting. So this one is how much will this impact our explicit business objectives? And if you have this, and like the holy grail is like our North Star metric is, and the example that I use, which we can stick with, is retention. So it's like, hey, this is going to touch all of our users this quarter, but it's not going to have as substantive an impact on retention as this other thing. And so you start to see and be able to distinguish reach from impact. The challenge there is that the goals by business function can vary. And so if you aren't able to rally everything around a North Star where it's like, hey, retention is important, but we're also trying to grow the business. So we need to balance those two. And ideally, you're never trying to people say, hey, what are your top priorities? It's like, it should be what your top priority, like that's a singular word.
That's an
Priority.
oxymoron.
Yeah, like you're supposed to have one priority. Like that's not, you're going about it wrong. So I think if you are like, oh, it's hard for us to associate impact, then it's like, maybe you need more rigor around sequencing North Star metrics or thinking about the maturity of the business because focus creates the space for performance.
And then you did mention the time factor. Everything does have a time decay. For example, like when we go back to the reach example, it might be able to reach a subset of users or all users this quarter, but they might not be so jazzed about it. Next quarter, it's like, all right, yeah, we got it. All right, here's the next problem you need to address. Now, when we go to impact, for example, it's like the timeline perspective is what's going to have the most impact right now, or like operating from a place of scarcity. When we talked about budgets, what's going to happen to our budget in the next 3 to 6 months, right? That's a timeline enough that's defined where it's okay, we need to work against that impact. What is the ripple effect into 1 year, 3 years? That's, I think, where timing can help you define or better level out how best to measure your impact and reach, I would say.
Yeah, totally. Because I think the big thing too is that these aren't absolutes; they're all like they're relative.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like, 10K versus 20K. Okay. And when we start to talk about like achieving a composite, like achieving some kind of new normalizing for, and we're going to jump ahead a little bit, but like reach might be a percentage, impact might be like a confidence rate, 0 not confident, 100% super confident. Effort's going to end up being hours, which is a number, which translates to dollars. And you're like, ooh, how do we kind of do this? So an easy way to do it is to assign a spectrum of 1, not great, low, to 4, awesome, high. And you want to try to normalize those factors so that you can come up with an equation to actually come to a cumulative score on like, hey, what level of priority does this initiative have? But the thing to kind of be aware of, and this is fresh because we just did the exercise, is I wouldn't go into the scoring too early because everything is relative, right? So 10K, is that expensive? It's like, I don't know. What's the other shit on the list? It's like, well, there's one for 50K. And it's like, okay, geez, 10K is a fifth of that. So that's going lower on the score, but that's also relative to the overarching budget. So we've got a 50K budget. 10K is significant, right? 50K is all you got. So you just be mindful that you probably want to think about the attributes for reach, impact, confidence, and effort before you start to assign a score. So I bounced a little bit ahead. And so we'll come back to that, but just a quick caveat as we're rolling. Confidence is, how confident are you in the estimates of reach and impact? So this is back to, if we're thinking about the Basecamp crew and Shape Up, like what's your bet, right? Like if we're playing poker, how many chips are you putting on the table? And without data, there's way spicier quotes. I can't remember the one. It's something like, unless you're God, bring data. or
That's a good one. I'm going to start using it.
Right. It's like, well, if you were God, I would take it at face value. But if not, show me the data. So without data, you're just another person with an opinion, right? So ideally, and we'll get into this in the example, reach is a defined percentage of your user base. Impact is quantified with a financial value or quantified with some other attributes. And your confidence should be a function of how data-driven your view is on reach and impact, just to put it as simply as possible.
Yeah. Man, my overall thought with all of these models, I still feel like there's not enough emphasis on time, because time will definitely like put a great definition around like what's most important today, because if you're not going to be alive tomorrow, it's going to change how you score a lot of these areas.
Yep. So wait for effort, because that's gonna address some of your stuff. And then when we think about how we actually pull this together into a composite score, you start to see what's weighted and what has a punitive versus a rewarding effect. So the good news is effort is like generally the most reasonable. It's like how many,
and
but
negotiable.
The thing too, right? Yeah. Totally. But it's like, this is an hourly sum hypothetically. So it's like, and we'll get into it with more in the example. And it's like, this is an hourly sum. It's going to require these teams. This is the cost per hour per team. This is the total cost. Cool. And then away you go. But a quick disclaimer here is, and maybe you make it 30%, but what's the OG saying is like, everything's 30%. This is like a cognitive bias or like a mental pitfall. Everything is at least 30% costlier, harder, takes longer, etc. So whenever you get an estimate from your team, go ahead and do yourself a favor and add a third. And that way, at least, you're not blowing through timelines and budgets and stuff like that. If anything, you're landing under budget, under time, and you can add that cash back to the fun pot.
We learned that in
So
consulting too. How many ever hours you scope for a project, add a 30% cushion.
totally. And a lot of that's time-based too, right? Where it's like we
Yep.
we overestimate the difficulty of stuff in the near term, we underestimate difficulty of stuff in the long term. And that's the same with goals. Like we're usually less likely to achieve our near-term goals, way more likely to achieve our long-term goals. And that's a function of compounding activities. Yeah,
Yep.
right. So it's and that's back to atomic habits and systems and shit like that. Let's bring this stuff to life, with a little example here. All right, so this would be, so here's an activity that falls in the feature product roadmap category. But hey, we've got this email template model. We want to refresh the UI and the UX. Reach, this is a made up scenario, but all customer segments this quarter. It's about as good as it gets. All customer segments this month, maybe a little juicier. So I could have maybe gone with a 3 out of 4. But again, this is relative to the other stuff. Impact, and the assumption here is that retention is the North Star metric. We gave this a 4 out of 4, and the fake evidence was 60% of churned users last quarter left due to frustration with creating and sending template emails. And then the big question is like 60, okay, what was the next thing 55%? Like, how much conviction do we have that this is the runaway obvious, kind of no-brainer? And so I added a little bit, workflow automation was the next most common churn reason at only 5%. So it's like, this is head and shoulders above the next stuff. We can substantiate this. And this is where it gets real juicy. Had we solved for this churn cause, we would have preserved 2K and MRR. So that's where you're trying to really get to no matter what. It's like quantifying the impact with dollar bills. So that's that bit. So 4 out of 4 on the reach, 4 out of 4 on impact. Confidence, 4 out of 4. This is pretty data driven and substantiated. And the thing is that that's almost always going to be the case. Like confidence is a function of your inputs for reach and impact. And then we get into effort. Oh shit. Or maybe not. Hey, 4 out of 4. That sounds great, right? And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe not. So
yeah. I questioned that when I first saw it.
Yeah. Well, and as I'll allude on, this, as we'll get to, this whole thing is kind of a gotcha. But it's like, all right, requires design, dev, QA, customer success. It's going to be 60 hours. That's probably understated for something like this. And the total cost of that respective labor is going to be 12K. And then I noted here again, but I think it's worth mentioning that the 4 out of 4 is highly relative. So let's say, of the 10 things we're considering, the top quartile is in the 10 to 15K range. All right. So that's like, ooh, this is a 4 out of 4. This is in the top quartile for effort. And so here's where it's like, oh, hey, Kjael, this is like a nice example you provided here, just straight 4 out of 4s across the board. But the thing is that in a fraction, you have a numerator. And so when you take a top line number and you divide it by something, 100 divided by 5 is very different than 100 divided by 50. So said another way, as effort goes up, and we would say that that's punitive, right? So that's punishing to your overarching score. That's way more impactful than if your reach gets better, your impact gets better, your confidence gets better, because that's all the stuff above the dividing line. And then you get to your RICE score. So if we look at this example, we've got 4 for the reach. Let's pull this in center. 4 for the reach, 4 for impact, 4 for competence. That gives us 12. Divided by 4 gives us a composite score of 3. So what seemed like straight A's here, it's like it's straight A's for the things that we reward, and it's like an F on the things that are punishing. So 3 is not very great. And to drive this point home, let's say that the effort instead was like half of what it is, right? And it's like, all right, cool. It's a 2 on the effort. All right, great. 12 divided by 2 is a 6. So changes in effort are just kind of compounding impact, right? So when we do reduce our effort, the composite score doubles to 6. So that's back to your commentary where speed and quality of execution is like trumps everything. Especially, and I think that you could say that that's applicable to life, but in SaaS too, where your product is in constant state of decay and the market's chasing and biting at your heels, and you're just running as hard as you can, praying to God you have your head up so you don't run into something. Effort's the name of the game. So then that's back to elite talent makes the whole world go round. So if you're going to optimize for anything across any of this shit, make sure you got the best people you possibly can in the right seats and get out of the way.
Couldn't have said it better. Elite talent is it.
That's it. No doubt about it. So cool. So we landed on the rice element. And I guess just to kind of wrap up quickly for us. So you got budgets and scarcity are critical. So start there. You need to establish constraints. And sometimes you want to probably even reduce the constraints. And something that I thought a lot about is like, the first time they handed Steve Jobs an iPhone, it was like a tablet. And he's like, it's got to fit in your hand. No, like it's impossible. He's like, okay, get it done. And sure enough, shit fits in your hand.
They got it done.
Right. So it's like those kind of constraints get people to do stuff that they think is impossible, which is something that you probably want. Like, obviously you don't want to give them something that's totally impossible, or morale will just slowly get gutted over time, but you want people to stretch beyond what they think is possible. And so translating that to budgets, you probably want to take a reasonable budget and then choke out 20% and then start from there, but it's going to force you to do stuff. There's another good one, and this is actually from that book that and he actually puts it in the context of when he's writing the book. He's like, deadlines are great because you're there and it's like, hey, we could polish up this last chapter, or we can change the graphics that support some of our points and make it a little bit better visual storytelling. We don't have time to do both. Because otherwise the thing just gets punted out, and it's like, and you just find yourself just kind of rounding out all these little edges and all this shit. And it's like, dude, we got to ship product, we got to get to market, we got to get it in the wild. And scarcity is a great way to do that. So now we've got scarcity. Now you need a structured way to compare and contrast options and look at them. Because the other thing, because without a scorecard, you get into kind of like that horrible washing machine spin cycle. And it's like, well, if we could release this product, a feature, people are going to love it. Yeah, but the support bot's kind of interesting. Yeah, but that's a little hard. We're not really sure. Yeah, but and you just spin around and around and around and around, and nobody knows what you want to do.
Nothing gets done.
Yeah. And you also lack kind of a framework to actually debate the pros and the cons of any kind of option. Specific to an attribute, right? So it just produces much more constructive and I would say rich conversation. So I can't recommend this exercise enough. I think just even as a function, like let's say you spin around and you never really even establish a framework, at least as a function of this, you're forced to think about your North Star metric, about resource constraints, about costs of shit, about a lot of stuff. And even if you get more clarity as an operator on those items, it's worth the exercise, I say. Thoughts? Am I crazy? Are we totally misguided? Should we pivot the whole thing to another framework, or what do you think?
Yeah, you were almost crazy when you were about to recommend the Kano models from Mortal Kombat, but
That's it.
No. This was definitely spot on, and it essentially, like you said, it's forcing someone to be more of a critical thinker instead of just going by your gut and just carrying on that washing machine emotion with ideas in your head. Just take a more quantifiable approach, a scorecard approach, even if it's not a fully baked out scorecard with the framework. Just this allows you to think more strategically about the approach versus just going at it with a gut feeling. It makes total sense. If you don't do it, then God help you.
Yeah, the only thing that could use some polish is the name. So maybe we'll go with like the Sub-Zero or the Luke Cage the Scorpion. Get over here. Something.
Let's do a trademark search first.
Yes, that's it. Beauty.
Start there.
Well, I think that's a wrap, man. And I think what's interesting, let's maybe think about for the next episode, let's maybe do a dive on the business model not the business model canvas, the buyer journey canvas, and how to think about that and mapping the buyer journey and how you foot content to that activity, how you foot kind of buyer journeys and workflows and like prompts and tooling and tech stack and KPIs. It really is kind of the best way to represent the whole thing, the whole machine that is the business. So I think it deserves some time and energy. But with that, thank you, Kay. Pleasure as always, my dude, for the love of the game. Tune in next week. Much love. Peace.